This is an article from Adam Kimmelman from August 26th of 2014. It's the top 10 Vancouver Canucks prospects, and I think it would have been amazing to just sit back, relax, and read this article from 10 to 1 to go over who we had in our pipeline and who we thought was going to be great. This is the top 10 Vancouver Canucks prospects from 6 years ago. Starting things off at number 10, we have ourselves Anton Cederholm, a 5th-round draft pick from the 2013 NHL entry draft. This article said that he was going to be making the NHL in 2016-2017. Now, back when the Vancouver Canucks did draft Cederholm, he was coming off of a pretty nice stint in junior. He was playing in the SHL, he was playing in the junior league in Sweden, and he made his way over to the Portland Winterhawks of the WHL, and people legitimately saw some really good NHL potential in this player. He was a big body, a stay-at-home defenseman, not too much point production, but a lot of mass and a lot of difficulty to play against. And because a good portion of the fan base watching this video probably doesn't know who he is, I think that kind of tells the whole story. Cederholm in 2016-17 actually went back to Sweden, played in the Allsvenskan, then he came to the Utica Comets, and he played in the Kalamazoo Wing system, and he hasn't played in 2 years. So, yeah, he's the 10th best prospect, eh? Moving on to the 9th best Vancouver Canucks prospect from 2014, it's Jared Mccann, the 24th overall pick in the 2014 NHL entry draft. 62 points in 64 games played in his draft season. Mccann was supposed to be a lethal sniper, a guy who could come in here, produce at a two-way rate, and just get some really nice goals once in a while. I remember at the press conference at Rogers Arena, Jared Mccann said that he models his game after Ryan Kesler, and that was very, very controversial because the fan base were really, really salty to Ryan Kesler at the time. But going back into his Draft Plus 1, Jared Mccann had a really good season with the Sioux Greyhounds and eventually made the Vancouver Canucks the next year. He got 18 points in 69 games, which a lot of people thought was somewhat disappointing, but the fact that he wasn't able to get sent to the AHL really kind of threw a wrench in it, and he was kind of forced to play in the NHL because Canucks fans were like, yeah, he's way too good for the OHL. He got traded to Florida in the Eric Branson trade. Bless our souls, right? And now, Jared Mccann is a legitimate middle six NHLer with the Pittsburgh Penguins, 35 points in 66 games. We made a video about the revitalization of Jared McCann's career, so I'm happy that he's actually turning out properly, but the fact is, he was a Vancouver Canucks prospect and he didn't really pan out for this team. Goodbranson was a completely other story, which we will talk about some other time. And frankly, I would not want to relive that in the slightest. Next up, it's the 8th best prospect in the Vancouver Canucks system. It is Dane Fox. Dane Fox is a guy who I was honestly so high on because I saw the 107 points in 67 games played he had with the Erie Otters, and I was like, yo, this guy is so good. He was 20 when the Vancouver Canucks signed him, and to be honest, the majority of his production came from playing with Connor McDavid, which a lot of Canucks fans didn't really consider at the time when he was living his days as a very productive OHL forward. NHL.com said that he was going to come into the NHL in 2015-16, and that could not have been further from the truth. In reality, in 2015-16, Dane Fox played with the Kalamazoo Wings, and he was a point per game there. He spent the majority of his pro career in the ECHL, never fully cracking an AHL system, and then he yeeted over to the DEL in Germany, was good over there, and now he's in Denmark playing for the Frederikshavn Whitehawks, getting 59 points in 48 games played. So, nice that he was able to craft out a hockey career, but as a Vancouver Canucks prospect, Dane Fox wasn't really anything. Next up, the 7th best Vancouver Canucks prospect in 2014 was actually a good one. It's Thatcher Demco. You don't need me to talk about Demco. Let's move on to the 6th best prospect, where we have ourselves a guy who the Vancouver Canucks acquired all the way back in 2011, Nicklas Jensen. Yeah, it's kind of weird how he was still considered a prospect a few years after the draft, but at the same time, it was only 3 years. He was turning 21, and Jensen was a guy who never really panned out with Vancouver. They drafted him after the Cup run, and a lot of people thought he had the potential to becoming a legitimate number 2, number 3 winger on an NHL team, specifically with the Canucks. And this Danish player was a guy who a lot of people had a lot of faith in. He was 6'3", 216 pounds, a big guy who could score, and he spent the majority of his time in the system with the Utica Comets, eventually getting traded to the New York Rangers, playing 7 games over there, but doing really well with the Hartford Wolfpack, and then afterwards he went over to Jokerit in the KHL and he started doing things over there. He's pretty good though, point-per-game player in the KHL. Certainly kind of unfortunate he didn't project with the Vancouver Canucks, but at the same time playing hockey is playing hockey. Now the 5th best Vancouver Canucks prospect, it's another 2011 draft guy. We're talking today about Frankie Corrado. Interesting pick right here. He was 21 when this article was written, and he was projected to making the NHL full-time the next season, which was 2014-15. Now, in reality, Frankie Corrado eventually got traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he was up and down in that system, but now he's playing in the Belleville Senators in the AHL still. I remember Corrado was one of the better Utica Comets defensemen, and a guy that a lot of people said had legit top 4 potential, so yeah, it just didn't really work out. Next up, it is the 4th best Vancouver Canucks prospect, taking a little bit of a trip back to the very, very immediate past. It's Hunter Shinkaruk from the 2013 NHL entry draft. Now, I just made an entire 10-minute video talking about what could have been with Hunter Shinkaruk, how fans thought he was going to be an elite Patrick Kane-like winger, and how he was going to have such an offensive impact with this team, but how that didn't happen, and now he went over to Kunlun in the KHL 2. I will say this though, if there's any prospect on this list that I'm more disappointed didn't pan out, it was Hunter Shinkaruk for sure. He's the guy on this list who I was so high on and who I had such a very big belief for that he would become great, and it was unfortunate to see that that didn't happen with any team, to be frank. If it was the Vancouver Canucks, if it was the Calgary Flames, if it was the Habs, as long as he had a great NHL career, I would have been happy with seeing him progress, but at the same time, having a star-studded KHL career doesn't seem too bad either. Now the 3rd best Vancouver Canucks prospect from 2014. It's a 2014 recently drafted player in Jake Virtanen, acquired 6th overall as a point-per-game Calgary Hitmen player. He was supposed to be a big power forward-like guy. Projected NHL arrival from this article was 2015-16, which was actually accurate because he did make the NHL that year. It's just playing in the NHL right away was really not great for his development. He had the same thing with Jared McCann, where he was too good for the WHL, but not eligible to play in the AHL, so the Canucks had no choice but to play him in the NHL, and in the NHL, he wasn't all too great. But nowadays, though, he's developed into a legitimate 20-goal guy, and a guy who honestly does project to being better down the line. The future is bright for Jake Virtanen, and I've been one of the biggest believers in that ever since I've been making these YouTube videos. Next up, it's the 2nd best NHL prospect in the Vancouver Canucks system. It's Brendan Gaunce from the 2012 NHL entry draft, a guy who is a member of the Boston Bruins nowadays, a guy who was never able to establish himself as a legitimate NHL forward with the Vancouver Canucks. He was mostly just a tweener, mostly just a guy who would get a few games here and there and stay up when the team had a lot of injuries. But for the most part, Gaunce was never really that established two-way PK specialist that the Canucks thought they drafted all the way back in 2012. It's unfortunate, but I hope things get better as his career goes on in Boston. And now the kicker. The best Vancouver Canucks prospect is no surprise, it is Beau Horvat, the eventual captain, the eventual 60-70 point pace player that the Canucks have today. It's a player that I'm glad to have picked up. It's a player who everybody in Vancouver equally loves nowadays. And sure, Corey Schneider was a very, very valuable trade piece back in the day, but Beau Horvat coming out of that, especially with him not being the main source of Vancouver Canucks offense and not expected to being the main source of Vancouver Canucks offense, it's a very, very good scenario that we have now with Beau Horvat on a team where he leads the charge, not on the score sheet, but in terms of morale, in terms of team quality time, in terms of being able to be a part of the Vancouver community. This list over here of Vancouver Canucks prospects from 6 years ago has a lot of flaws, but Beau Horvat definitely is not one of them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.